Welcome to the presentation on Microsoft licensing. This presentation runs through the basics of the Microsoft licensing programs and the different licensing models. My name is Vicky Lee and I will be taking you through this presentation today. In this presentation I'll be clarifying what a license actually is, the different types of license available and the different ways of purchasing licenses, and then touching on the whole concept of software asset management. So what actually is a license? What does Microsoft sell? Well, Microsoft sells the rights to use software. So they're not selling the actual software itself. You know, when you purchase Microsoft Office, you're not buying Office, you are buying the rights to use Office. And what you can do with that software is dictated through the use rights document. So depending on how you have purchased your software, that will control what you're allowed to do with it. Now, there are a number of different types of license available, and the first license that we're going to look at is a device license. In the product fundamentals presentation, we met Ewan, the user, and we did discuss here that Ewan would need running on his computer a client operating system, client applications, and if he was doing things such as emailing, that he would be accessing a server which would also be running a server operating system and the appropriate server applications. Now, all of the software installed on the desktop machines or the servers do need to be licensed. So let's take the client operating system first of all. Now, we know at the moment that that's Windows 7. So if Ewan is running Windows 7 on his desktop PC, then that PC needs a Windows 7 license. If he's then working with Office 2010, again, his desktop PC needs a license for Office 2010. So those licenses are per device. Each device that the software is running on needs the license to run that software. But we have talked about the fact that if Ewan is trying to email, for instance, that he will need to be accessing the server that, as I said, needs to run an operating system and the appropriate applications. So the server operating system is Windows Server 2008 R2. So any server running that would need that license. And then if Ewan wants to email, he'll be accessing an Exchange server. So if the server is running Exchange, that also then needs an Exchange Server 2010 license. So all of those licenses have been assigned to every device that this software is installed on. But that doesn't actually complete the picture here. There is a license missing. And the license that is missing is one to license the end user to access the services of the server, known as a Client Access License, or CAL. Now, CALs are required for every user or device that is accessing the services of a server. So if Ewan here is accessing the server that is running Windows Server 2008 and Exchange Server 2010, he needs CALs to license him to access those servers. So he would need both a Windows Server CAL and an Exchange Server CAL. So just to clarify, the CAL, or Client Access Licensing, as I say, is allowing the client to access the services of the server. It's licensing them to do that. But it's very rare in a company that you would be working with just one server. So we've introduced a second server, and this server is running Windows Server and SQL Server. Now, the CAL that Ewan has for Windows Server does license him to access both of those Windows servers in the organisation, so he doesn't need another Windows Server CAL, but if he is accessing SQL Server, he will then need a SQL Server CAL as well. So this licensing model is known as the Server and CAL licensing model. So let's take a look at the server and CAL licensing model in a little bit more depth, because the CALs do come in two types. You can purchase them as user CALs or device CALs. So the example I'm going to give is using Windows Server. So imagine that we have got 3 Windows servers sitting in the organisation, and we can see them shown in the middle of the screen. For each of those servers running Windows Server, we would need to purchase a Windows Server license. And then we know already that we do need to buy CALs for either every user or device accessing the services of the server. So over on the left-hand side, where we have individual users that are using multiple devices, the most cost-effective way to license them would be with user CALs. And you would purchase your CAL and you would assign that to the user. That means that each individual user can use any number of devices to access the Windows servers running in the organisation. The opposite of that is shown on the right-hand side, where we have a device that is used by many users. The best way to license this would be with a device CAL. You assign the CAL to the individual device, and that device can be used by as many users as needed. So great, for instance, with companies that are working with shift workers. They have 3 different shifts in a day. Those 3 different people are sharing the same computer. You might also have external users that you want to license to access your server. And when we're talking about an external user, we're talking about a non-employee of the company. So again, you would just purchase CALs for those external users, and they would then be licensed to access the services of that server. Now, a couple of things to highlight here. I have already mentioned that the CALs here will license you to access all of the Windows servers sitting inside of the organisation. But the CALs are version specific, so they must match the highest version of server that is being used. So out of these 3 servers, if one of them was running Windows Server 2008 and the other 2 were running Windows Server 2003, it would be very important that the CALs were Windows Server 2008 CALs. So they must always match the highest version of server that is being used. So that's the basic server and CAL licensing model. But with certain products, again, we have got 2 different types of CALs. With some of our products, such as the ones listed at the bottom of the screen, SharePoint Server and Exchange Server, we do have 2 levels of CALs. We have standard CALs and enterprise CALs. The CALs which you work with are all based on the level of functionality that you need your users to access. So let's use Exchange Server here as our example. We have 3 Exchange servers running in the organisation, so we have purchased 3 Exchange Server licenses. Now we need to think about the CALs. If we want our users just to access the basic functionality of the Exchange Server, so really just the email and calendar side of things, then we need to purchase the standard CAL. And those Exchange standard CALs license the users or devices to access the core functionality of those Exchange servers. If you want your users to access the full functionality of the Exchange server, then you would need to purchase an enterprise CAL as well as the standard CAL. And by purchasing both the standard and enterprise CALs, you're licensing your users to access the full functionality of the servers. The same would be true again for your external users. You can purchase them either just a standard CAL or both standard and enterprise CALs. If we think about Exchange Server and the fact that there are a number of different ways for you to access your emails, the standard CAL for Exchange Server would license you to access your emails either via Outlook, the Outlook web app, or the Outlook mobile client. But if you wanted to telephone your Exchange server and use the voice access, or if you wanted to, for instance, have answer phone messages coming in through your inbox, these are both enterprise CAL functionalities. So you would need to purchase both the standard and enterprise CALs. The next type of license we need to look at are the management licenses, which are used specifically for the family of System Center products. Imagine in this example that we have System Center Operations Manager running on the management server at the bottom middle of the screen. This server would require an Operations Manager license. Now, Operations Manager will be monitoring a number of machines, and those machines all need to be licensed with what's known as a management license, or ML. If it's a client machine, as we can see at the top of the slide here, that's being managed, it needs a client management license. And if it's a server, then it needs either a standard or an enterprise server management license. The CALs are all available as individual purchases, so for a customer who just wants to buy a Windows Server CAL or an Exchange Server CAL, they can do that. But the CALs do also come in suites, which provide a more cost-effective way for customers to purchase their licenses. Now, the first suite is known as the Core CAL suite, and this consists, as you can see, of 6 licenses. Your Windows Server CAL, Exchange, SharePoint and Link standard CALs, System Center Configuration Manager, Client Management License and Forefront Endpoint Protection. The other suite is the Enterprise Cal suite. And the Enterprise Cal suite consists of the whole of Core Cal, plus all of those extra Cals, again, that you can see on the slide, such as the Exchange, SharePoint and Lync Enterprise Cals, some more of the management licenses for our System Center products, and also some more of our Forefront licensing. So the next license to look at is the external connector license, and I'll revert back to Windows Server as my example here. So we've already seen on a very similar slide here that we've got 3 Windows servers running in the company with their server licenses assigned to them, and user and device Cals for the employees that are accessing the services of the server. And I did talk earlier about your external users, those non-employees of the company that are going to access the services of your server. And I commented before that you could buy Cals for those non-employees. And that's great if there aren't that many of them. But what if you have a large quantity of non-employees accessing the services of your server, or potentially an unknown quantity of non-employees? Then you would need to go for an external connector license. And you would purchase an external connector license for every server that those non-employees are going to access. And that then licenses you for an unlimited number of external users to access the services of that server. The last type of license to look at in this section is the per processor license. Some of our servers are licensed per processor. And what you have to do here is count up the number of physical processors sitting in your server. And you can see in our picture here that all of our servers have 4 processors each. Now we don't care whether they're multi-core processors, it's literally just counting up the number of physical processors. So as in this example, we have 4 processors running in each server. Each server would need to be covered with 4 per processor licenses. That then licenses the software to be installed on the server and for all users and all devices, whether they are internal or external users, to access the services of that server. So once you have license per processor, there is no further licensing required to cover that server. Let us now move on to take a quick look at subscription licensing. There are a number of different types of subscription license, but we are just going to focus on 2 of them today. Subscription licenses are generally required when accessing one of our online services, such as Forefront or Office 365. The first license to look at is the User Subscription License, or USL. This license is required for each individual user to access the services of an online service, such as Office 365. The second license is the Device Subscription License, or DSL, which is required to license an individual device to access the services of an online service, such as Windows Intune. Well, we've finished looking at the different licensing models that are out there. Now let's look at the different ways to buy a license. Let us take a look, first of all, at where the technology is likely to run. There are really 2 choices, as an on-premise deployment or as an online service. Customers have traditionally run the technology on their own servers in an on-premise deployment. However, the other option is to allow Microsoft to host the technology and for the customer to access it as an online service, such as with Office 365. This choice of on-premise or online service will have an impact on how a customer purchases their licenses. There are 4 different ways to purchase a license. The first way is the full package product or boxed product, sold by retailers where you can literally just go in and buy the box from the shelf. And just note here that typically 1 box does equal 1 license, though as ever there are a few exceptions to that rule. But it is a very convenient way to purchase your software, and this does enable you to purchase on-premise software. The next option is your OEM licensing, which is when your license comes pre-installed on a new computer. So you buy your new computer, that would have your OEM license on it, so for example a Windows 7 OEM license, and as I say, it is pre-installed on the machine. Now you are quite restricted with what you can do with that license. So for example, there are no transfer rights with that license. So the software is tied to that machine. And if that machine dies, then the software dies with it. And again, this would be an on-premise license. Then we think about our online services, and this is where you can be licensed for your hosted software rather than running the software on-premise, as we discussed previously. And finally, there's volume licensing, where customers can purchase their on-premise licenses and, to be honest, some of the online services as well. And these are sold by our resellers. You can purchase the licenses through a variety of different volume licensing agreements that are aimed at different sizes and shapes of organisation. And we are going to go into this in a little bit more detail right now. One of the nice things about purchasing licenses through volume licensing is that there are a range of agreements to suit all different shapes and sizes of organisation. There are 4 key factors to distinguish between the agreements and to help recommend the correct agreement for a customer. The first factor is size of organisation. The agreements listed on the left-hand side of the slide are aimed at the small to medium size organisation, ranging from 5 to 250 PCs in size. The agreements on the right-hand side are aimed at the medium to large organisation with more than 250 PCs. The next factor is license type. Do you want a perpetual or non-perpetual license? Now, a perpetual license licenses the customer to use that software forever. So an Office 2010 perpetual license purchased today would license the user to use that software for as long as they wanted. Whereas with a non-perpetual license, the user is effectively renting that license. They're buying the rights to use that software for a period of time, and that's generally a 3-year period. The next factor distinguishing between the agreements is standardization or not. So the agreements with all PCs written beside them are agreements where the customer is committing to put certain software on all of the computers within their organisation, and they're getting a discount on their license price for doing so. Whereas the agreements at the top, Open Value Non-Company Wide and Select Plus, are great for customers who want to pick and choose the licenses that they want to purchase. The final factor distinguishing these different agreements is software assurance. So on the 3 Open Value agreements and the 2 Enterprise agreements, software assurance is included so that the customer has to purchase both license and software assurance. Whereas with Open and Select Plus, software assurance is an optional purchase. The different colours on the agreements are there just to highlight the fact that the agreements on the left-hand side, the small to medium-sized business agreements, can be sold by any reseller, whereas the agreements on the right-hand side are sold by our LARs, our large account resellers. And I would also like to highlight here that the Select agreement is just faded out because as of the 1st of July 2011, no new Select agreements could be started. But there may well be customers out there who still have active Select agreements. We have mentioned software assurance, so let's just take a minute to look at that in a little bit more detail. Software assurance, as the statement at the top says, consists of benefits which provide technology, services and support to manage the software lifecycle. There are a number of software assurance benefits available, and some of them are listed on the slide here. Possibly the most famous one is the new product versions benefit, but there are some other very useful ones, including the home use program, the planning services and training vouchers. If you want to know more about software assurance, then you can watch the associated presentation on that. We have looked at some of the benefits of buying licenses through volume licensing, such as the range of offerings and software assurance. But what are some of the other benefits? Well, first of all are the downgrade rights, allowing customers to use earlier versions of the software that they have purchased. Then there are the re-imaging rights, allowing IT to create a standard image of the software which can be deployed across the whole organisation. And finally, there is the aspect of easier license management. So let's think about that in a little bit more detail. When we're talking about license management, we are talking about looking after and keeping track of all the licenses that you've purchased, regardless of whether you've purchased them through volume licensing, through OEM licensing or full package product. And this is referred to as Software Asset Management, or SAM. So why do we have to worry about software asset management? What's so important about it? Well, the statement at the top of the slide sums up really what software asset management is. It's about the management, control and protection of the software assets within an organisation. But why is it important? Well, it's really there to ensure that, one, companies don't overspend on their licenses and they don't purchase more licenses than they actually use, but also there to ensure that companies have paid for the licenses that they are working with and to ensure that they are using legal software. So how do you go about managing your software assets? Well, the first thing is to look at what you've actually deployed within an organisation. And software such as System Center Configuration Manager will find that out for you and will tell you what has been installed on all of your machines. Another factor to look at is how many people work in the organisation, because the number of users you have should be vaguely indicative to the number of, for instance, Office licenses that you'd be working with in the organisation. What else do you need to know about? Well, what do the vendors think you have bought? So you can request from Microsoft a Microsoft license statement, which will sum up all the software that you have purchased. And also being able to prove what you have purchased, regardless of whether you've purchased those licenses through full package product, through OEM or through volume licensing. And for instance, with volume licensing, you have the Volume Licensing Services Centre, or VLSC, as a place that will list all of the software that you've purchased through volume licensing, hence making it very easy to tell what software you've purchased through volume licensing, as opposed to, for instance, full package product and OEM licensing, where you do need to keep proof of the licenses you've purchased, such as keeping hold of your certificate of authenticity to show that you have actually purchased that license. As we draw this presentation to a close, let's have a quick reminder of what we've looked at. We covered what was a license, the different license types and licensing models that are out there, the different ways of buying a license, and the importance of good software asset management. So that concludes this presentation. I hope you've enjoyed listening to it and wish you the best of luck when taking the associated assessment. Goodbye.